We welcome Randy Erwin as our guest for Music Monday of the Ozarks. Randy started as a professional musician playing trumpet, Springfield Symphony Orchestra for 2 years, regional rock and roll bands, the Castaways, Uncle Wally, Shadow Rock, and he was a teacher of private trumpet lessons for 2 years. He's been an entrepreneur. He had Ozark Talent Management, Springfield, Missouri. He's a founding partner. He had the video artist of Fort Smith, Fayetteville, Arkansas. He bought that. Good Music Agency, Missoula, Montana. Minneapolis, Minnesota partner. Variety artist, Hollywood, California. He's an agent there. Backstage Planet, Minneapolis, Minnesota, founding partner. Entertainment Services International, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Denver, Colorado. Springfield, Missouri, founder, owner, 1988 to the present. He's a talent buyer, event planner, concert promoter, booking agent, personal manager. Please welcome Randy Erwin and Steve Sneed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. As far as anybody turned out here, you know, the Royals are playing the Yankees in the playoffs, Major League Baseball playoffs, and Monday Night Football's the Chiefs, so I didn't think anybody would be here, so I'm impressed and thank you for coming. I'm flattered, so hopefully I've got some interesting stuff to tell you.
He says closer to the microphone, please.
Oh, closer.
Yeah. What an honor to be here. I haven't known Randy for that many years. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago I met him and was honored to be asked to kind of moderate and interview Randy tonight. And in the process of doing that, learned his life story, which here's a guy who grew up in Springfield among us. Some of you guys know him. I didn't know him that well. I went to high school with his younger sister, Leslie, and but sitting down with him for a couple of times and learning his life story has been really something. Kurt read kind of the thumbnail sketch of his biography, and Randy and I are going to go into it in more detail tonight. I would say, Randy, nobody likes to, sit around and tell their life story. I know, on the other hand, if I kind of read what Kurt just read, it might sound like his memorial service, so we don't want either one of those to happen. But I want to make sure we get on the record kind of everything he's done, and then let Randy, kind of go into more detail and tell some stories that will make your eyebrows raise, without doubt. I'd say he's gotten where he's gotten, which is a lot of places throughout the United States and the world by smarts, hard work, good luck, and as Randy would tell you himself, the grace of God. I mean, it's quite something. So high school here in town, and then on to college at what's now MSU for a year.
SMS freshman year only. Yeah.
Yeah, and microphone.
Yeah, freshman year. Sorry.
Yeah. And then to the University of Kansas for another year, studying
music major, studied trumpet under Ken Bloomquist. Had a partial scholarship, but I don't know how I got it because my grades were shit. and I dropped out after my sophomore year out of school and got drafted. The Vietnam War just started, so.
And tell us about Vietnam. You didn't go there.
No, I was blessed to not have to go to Vietnam. Went up to Kansas City to the induction center. You go and you take your physical, and then they swear you in. And so after your physical, and you're standing in this room, and the sergeant comes in and he's going to swear you in. First thing he says is, okay, any of you swinging dicks that think you can do something besides go to Vietnam and get your ass shot at, go see the sergeant over there at the desk, and you can sign up for an additional year. If you're drafted, it's 2 years, but if you sign up, it's a third year. So any of you think you can do something, in the service besides just infantry and going to Nam, go see him, and you can sign up for a third year. And if you qualify, you can choose your job, and if there's an opening, you can pick out where you want to be stationed. So I'm in that line. Went over there and said, I want to play trumpet, I want to play in the band, and I want to be at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And thank God there was an opening at the base there. And so I served my 3 years in the military at Fort Lost in the Woods and in the Army band.
And ended up with a job as...
I ended up... After my first year, and I got really lucky, the easiest job in the military is the post bugler. You don't have to report for duty, you don't get up in the morning, nothing. You have to, and they always keep 3 buglers on the bass. And if you're in the band, if you're the first year trumpet player and there's an opening, one of the buglers either gets transferred or gets out, then you, the first year trumpet player, can opt out of the band and be post bugler. So I'm in that line. I got to be a bugler, and so for 2 weeks you play taps at funerals. That's all you do, and you just check the duty sergeant a day or two before, and if there's a funeral, you report in and you ride with the funeral team out, you know, the rifleman and the lieutenant, and you go and you play taps at a funeral, and you go back and you're off. That's it. And then the third week, every third week, you play retreat at post headquarters. So that's all you have to do is show up about 10 minutes till 5 p.m. You march out, they fire off the cannon, you play retreat, they bring the flag down, hold it, and you're done. That's your job for the day. So that's what I... No reveille. They played that on the speaker tape. We didn't have to get up. And of course, I was living in Springfield, which was it was about an hour and a half from here to Fort Leonard Wood on the interstate, and I had a motorcycle, so when I was staying at home, you know, before we got married, and motorcycling down here to, you know, and then go up to play retreat and then back to Springfield. I got married, what year was that? 69, I'm sorry, yeah. It's my wife, Kathy, she keeps me straight. Got married to her, I met her at a military funeral in Mountain View, Missouri. That's right.
And I went home and asked my mom if I could, and she said, absolutely not. She said, I know what those Army boys want. So I made a beeline right up to the graveyard, and that's one bet.
True story. I asked her to marry me that day, and that was in June, and in September we got married, and all our friends said it'll never last. They don't know each other. We've been married 55 years and still together.
Okay, so great military story. Then some private, giving private lessons and that sort of thing. But I want to kind of fast forward to, not to make light of your trumpet playing, but the regional rock and roll bands here, the Castaways and Uncle Wally, which became Shadow Rock with our friend Barty Naote here, who's in the audience. Yeah. Okay. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So let me back up to the when I got out of the Army. The band was already started, I think. Didn't you already have it going? And you must have needed a trumpet player and didn't know that I couldn't play worth a shit. So anyway, so I started playing with, it was Uncle Wally at the time, and later changed their name to Shadow Rock. And
Uncle Wally was Mark Morton's nickname.
oh, is that what it was? You know, I never remembered where the name came from. Some people have asked me, and I didn't know that. So anyway, we were playing regionally, you know, and making some out-of-town trips. We went down to New Orleans, I remember in particular, a couple of times. Played in the French Quarter at the Ivanhoe. I remember that at the corner of Bourbon and Toulouse. So anyway, and I think Family Tree, it was, I think, their first play gig. Remember, we played the Homecoming in Bolivar at the, was that the Bolivar Baptist College?
Southwest Baptist, yeah.
Yeah, at the field house, and the Family Tree, which later became Ozark Mountain Daredevils, opened the show for us. I remember that. I think that was their first paid gig, I believe.
That's a little irony, isn't it?
So then from there, I can't remember what year that would have been. About 70. No, about 70.
72, 73 for that.
73, and I think I left the band about 73. And Kathy said, you need to get a real job. And our first child, well, we had a second one on the way, and basically said, you know, you need a real job and something that makes some money, you can stay at home. And my brother-in-law owned a nightclub called Wine and Spirits on Glenstone. And he was having pretty good bands in there, groups like Granny's, Bathwater would be playing there and stuff. And he hired me to just take care of the bands, you know, hire all the bands. And I figured out that the better bands, not that there weren't some good Springfield bands, but, you know, they were playing all over town, and some of the better traveling bands we could get, but the prices were too expensive, so I found other clubs like in Joplin and Fort Smith or Galena, Kansas, or Fayetteville, wherever, and I'd get 4 or 5 clubs, and we'd go after the same band, maybe somebody out of Chicago, and we'd talk them into playing. I said, look, I can deliver like 4 or 5 shows, and we talk them into playing for less money. And so that was kind of like the beginning of a light bulb going on, saying, well, wait a minute, I could do this for a living. I should be getting paid from those bands to find all this work for them. And one day these 2 guys came rolling into town, came into the club and wanted to know who was booking the bands and stuff, and they cornered me in the club and we started talking. These guys come in with these bolo ties and these impressive cowboy outfits and big 10-gallon hats, and rolled in a big red Cadillac convertible. And it was the Lyons brothers, Bobby and Jimmy Lyons. And they said, well, listen, we're going to open up a concert hall here in town, and we want to hire you, but we're not going to pay you. And I said, well, okay, how does that work? And he said, we just want you to manage the room and book the shows, but we're going to give you an office space for free, and you can put your booking agency in there. You'll have a secretary and a typewriter, and you just book the shows and kind of oversee the concerts. And so I did that. I went over to, and it was on Glenstone, 305 South Glenstone. It used to be the Walnut Bowl, and then it turned into, they had contractors come in and convert it into a concert hall. So I started running my booking agency out of there, and they paid the phone bill too, which was great. So I was booking shows in there. I remember we did like Dr. John and the New York Dolls, which was kind of radical for Springfield. And we had some good shows. And then one day we decided to get something bigger, and I had a chance to get Ike and Tina Turner, but it was crunching the numbers, and it was too big of a show to play in the Lions Den, so we booked it at the Shrine Mosque. And that was in 1973, I think. And booked it at the Shrine Mosque. And around this time period, and the show was selling great. As a matter of fact, it sold out. And I noticed things were getting a little peculiar, because the secretary kept saying, well, they're getting calls from Bobby or Jimmy. People are looking for them. People, you know, they owe money and they've got some bills to pay. And
let me interject. So you told me you've got an office there and a secretary, and they'd show up every week or so, and they had something going on down in Branson. So,
right,
yeah, so
right. So these guys were never around. I mean, once in a while they'd show up. They weren't even there for the concerts most of the time. You know, they would pop into town once in a while and just see how things were going and leave, collect money, and and leave. And they had hired these architects and some designers, and they were planning a rodeo theme park down in Branson. And it was, they had architect plans for this, and there was a big rodeo and rest country clothing shops and restaurants, and they were going to do this big thing down in Branson and have concerts down there.
Getting investors to invest in the project.
Exactly, and they had the plans, and they were meeting with investors and taking money from investors and signing people up. And so things didn't seem right to me, though, because then the contractor kept coming by looking for him and said he owed him some money. And so anyway, it came time for the Ike and Tina Turner show.
And normally the act, like, I mean, most acts you told me would get paid 50% up front.
Correct. Usually when you book a show on a national touring act, you pay a 50% deposit to the agency, and then the balance of the money you pay them the night of the show. Well, I got a call from Frank Barcelona in New York, their Ike and Tina's agent, and he said, I haven't gotten the deposit from you guys yet. And I said, well, I thought they'd sent it in. And he said, well, we don't have it. And he says, we'd done enough shows, and I had enough of a reputation. He said, just pay Ike. You pick him up at the airport, and you make sure and pay him the full amount when he gets there. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So it was time to go get him, and the Lyons brothers said, well, we're going out, closing out all the ticket outlets, and we'll meet you for the hotel. So I drove them from the airport over to the Lamplighter where they were staying, corner of Glenstone and Sunshine. Ike was getting a little agitated. He says, where's my money? And I said, well, the Lyons brothers are closing out the outlets, and they'll meet us here at the hotel room. So he said, well, you're coming upstairs with us then. And so up to the hotel room, I'm standing around, and where are these guys? And it was getting nervous, and Ike and Tina started getting into an argument, imagine that. And it was a suite. Ike had this gun, and he placed it on the counter in the kitchen area, kind of in the suite. And those two started arguing, and the phone rang. I answered, and it says, it's for you. And it's Jimmy Lyons. And Jimmy says, Randy, you've been good to us. You know, we don't want to see you get caught up in this, and we want to take care of you. He said, we're on our way out of town. There's not going to be a show tonight. And he said, don't worry about it, but get out of there, go over to the Lions Den and get all your Rolodex and all your office stuff, and take anything you want. Just if there's something in there, just take it. And but get over there tonight, because it'll probably be boarded up by Monday. And the blood just drained from my body. I just had visions of Ike pulling that gun on me, and I wasn't going to get out of there alive. And they were fighting so bad in the bedroom, I just thought, okay, I'm getting out of here. And I quietly opened that door, ran down the stairs, ran to my car, drove over to the Lions Den, got all my stuff, took this brand new IBM Selectric typewriter, and thought, okay, this is cool, and I'm out of here. And that was it. There was no concert. It didn't play. Nobody got paid.
The Lyons brothers, never to be seen again until.
So I had heard, I think through a trade magazine or something, that they grabbed Bobby. They nabbed him at the airport in Vancouver. He got arrested just maybe a year later. And there was a Billboard magazine put on these events called every year. It was like an industry-wide event called Billboard Talent Forum, alternating between New York and LA. It was in New York that year, and I went to that event, and there was a panel, and there was concert promoters up on the stage, and they were giving a presentation, and then at the end they started answering questions from the audience. And I'm over on one left side, and there was a big aisle down the center, and some guy in the back, and they take a mic to you, and you ask your question, and some guy, I looked around, and some guy in a big old cowboy hat and a bolo tie, and I looked around and said, I'll be damned. It was Jimmy Lyons. And so as soon as the session was over, I beelined over to him and I said, what in the hell? He had a badge on. He was, attending the event, and it was under a different name. And he goes, shh, let's go down to the bar and talk. So I think we were in the Midtown Marriott or something. We would go down to the bar, and he gave me a song and dance about how he said, you didn't get hurt in all that, did you? You didn't get any trouble. I said, no, I was fine. Thanks for the typewriter. I was fine. And then he said, well, don't blow my cover. And I said, hey, it doesn't mean anything to me. I don't care. These people could care less probably too, so it doesn't matter to me. Good luck to you. And he pulled out a wad of $100 bills and peeled off about 3 or 4 and just handed them to me and said, take care of yourself. Last I ever heard of them.
Where were they from?
Canada. They were from Canada. I'm not for sure where in Canada, but they were known. They were under various aliases. I think they'd been running scams a lot of places. So there's a newspaper article clipping in there about the show and it canceling, and an ad for the show. And I forget which bank it was, but one of the banks was after them for writing bad checks and borrowed money they didn't pay, and they owed about $20,000, and the contractor owed him $41,000 something. So.
You've got a lot of crazy stories. That's probably the craziest one that you've told me.
Yeah, that was wild.
Early on in your career. So then, obviously, that job ended, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that ended, and Barney and I started. That's when Barney approached me about starting Ozark Talent Management, a booking agency, and I had that little thing going to myself, at the Lions Den, but I didn't have an office space, and it seemed like it made sense to me. Tell me if I say anything that's not right, but I think this is how it went. So we rented some office space next to Shakey's Pizza Parlor at a little 2-story office building on Glenstone, and we were there maybe 6 months or so, not long at all. And I don't know what the hell we were thinking, but we rented the 10th floor, top floor of the Plaza Towers in the southeast corner.
I know what you were thinking.
So we moved the office there to Plaza Towers, and I think we were there about a year, maybe a year. Was it a year? Maybe it was 2. And then we moved over to Bank Building on Jefferson, brand new building on Jefferson, and it was
Centera Bank Building.
yeah. And so then we moved to there, and we were expanding the business. Dan Faggart and Kathy Reed, or Bright, I'm not for sure. Is it Reed or Bright? Kathy Bright. She was our secretary up at Plaza Towers, and then when we moved, she wanted to be an agent, and we hired another secretary, and she became an agent, and Dan Faggard came down from Kansas City and was one of our agents there as well. And I can't remember, was that 76 maybe? 75 or 76?
74 to 76 is what you said.
Yeah, 76, that was about when we moved. And I wasn't Barney's best friend at this point, because I decided that I just needed to get out of Springfield. I wanted to book bigger bands and just was looking for another opportunity. Barney was great. You know, you were in that business more than I did, and it's you know, during that time, you know, we had a monopoly. I think we put what's his name, Bob Philibert, out of business when we got going, and we had monopoly on all the bands in northwestern Arkansas, and northern Oklahoma, southeastern Kansas, and all of Missouri. Other than maybe if you go up to Dave McQuitty up in Kansas City, gave us a little competition. But yeah, we were killing it. But it was just booking bands, fraternity and sorority parties, and high school proms, and country clubs, and that kind of stuff. But I wanted to book national acts. I thought I was going to be a big-time agent. My dreams were bigger than reality at the time, and I remember we were booking the Ozark Mountain Daredevils when they changed their name from Family Tree and just got the recording contract, became the Ozark Mountain Daredevils. And I remember getting a telegram. Back then, everything was, they didn't have faxes and email. I remember getting a telegram from Fred Bolander at IFA in Los Angeles, and it was a cease and desist that we've signed the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, and my dreams just went up in smoke. It just killed me. It's like, no, tell me this isn't true. They'd signed a management deal with Stan Plesser, Good Karma, in Kansas City. And so that was the end of the Ozark Mountain Daredevils at the time.
And so you moved on to
Missoula, Montana.
And how did that happen?
Well, it's an odd place to go if you want to be in the music business. And I was thinking I want to get out of Springfield, and I go to a smaller town yet. But the reason I went there, this guy, Doug Brown, who he was admin assistant to the senior VP in Wells Fargo Bank for the marketing department. And this guy was really smart when it came to marketing, but he got fired or left, and his folks had a ranch in Missoula, Montana, or just outside of Missoula. And he hooked up with a guy that was booking bands all over the Northwest. And they started a booking agency out there called the Good Music Agency. I ran into him in Los Angeles at one of those Billboard talent forums again, and they were trying to get their bands booked down in our neck of the woods, and I was trying to, at the time, remember Larry Raspberry and the High Steppers. Larry Raspberry had gotten a contract with, I think it was Stax Records, and he started getting some airplay. This is back in the time when we didn't have computers. I mean, this is when business was rough. There weren't any computers. You couldn't, you didn't know where all the clubs were or anything. You just had to wing it. You know, I had a big old Rolodex with wheel, and I'd find an account and I'd, you know, write it up. But he was getting airplay, and I didn't know on the West Coast, and I didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about venues out in the West Coast, and how am I going to get him booked? So Larry Raspberry, by the way, was the lead singer of the band The Gentrys before. Remember that song, Keep On Dancing? So
From?
the Memphis, Tennessee, yeah. And we had quite a few acts out of Memphis market. I remember Larry Raspberry Can Function. Anyway, so he turned me on to this gal at the record label who later ended up going and running the marketing for Electric Light Orchestra, and they started their own label. But she, you know, gave me the names of some of the radio stations. We used to get, remember, we'd order the Yellow Pages phone books from, we get Yellow Pages books from like Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Eugene, San Francisco, Sacramento. So we get the Yellow Pages, and they'd look up the record or the radio stations. And if I didn't know the radio station in the market, if she didn't have it for me, I'd just call a radio station at random. And it's like, are you the classic rock station in town? They said, no, you need to call blah, blah, blah. So then I'd call that radio station, and I say, I represent Larry Raspberry and the High Steppers, and I think they might be getting some airplay there on your station. I said, yeah, all right. Well, I need to know where to book them. You know, what's the best venue in town, nightclub or whatever, where they should be playing? He'd say, well, you want to call Bob over at what such and such, and so I'd call the club and I'd say radio station's giving them airplay, and bingo, then you're in, and so I'd get it. But that's how we did it. And there wasn't any email for contracts. We had to type them up and mail the contracts, so we'd type them up in triplicate, mail the contracts, and we'd go to ABC Photos and get 8x10 glossy photos, promo shots of the band, because you didn't have email where you couldn't send it or download it off the internet, so we'd have to mail the contracts. We'd send a couple of 8x10 glossy photos and a bio that we'd have printed up, and that was when it was rough back then. So
you end up in Missoula for how long? A couple of years?
yeah, a couple of years.
And who are you booking?
New Riders of the Purple Sage, Michael Murphy, Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. I was doing some buying, selling, meaning I get a connection with the band, and I'd talk to some promoters in the Northwest, up there in Montana, Idaho, in that area, Wyoming, and so we'd issue a contract, and then they would issue a contract to me, and then to the Good Music Agency, and then we'd get paid a commission in between, the difference in the two contracts. And that's kind of when I got reconnected with the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, because the band's career was waning a little bit by this time, maybe just a little bit. And the agency they were with, IFA, it merged with ICM, which is one of the biggest agencies in the business today, them and Creative Artists Agency. But those guys, Fred Bolander and Dan Weiner, left, and they moved to Monterey, California, and started an agency in Monterey, and they had Jackson Browne, the Doobie Brothers, the Beach Boys, Carole King, Dan Fogelberg. They had an impressive roster, and the Ozark Mountain Daredevils were one of their clients, but it was one of the lesser groups on the roster. Well, I'd still kept my connection with Stan Plesser, and occasionally I'd come up with a booking for the guys, and Stan, I didn't even have to double contract it. Stan would just say whenever I'd get a booking, he said, I'll just pay you 10%, and he'd mail me a check after the gig played. And so I started getting more and more bookings with the Daredevils again, and their agency, Monterey Peninsula Artists, wasn't booking that many shows on them, and Stan was still having to pay them, so he was paying 20% double commission just to keep it going. So when their contract expired, he just didn't renew it, and then I had the band back, and it was like, yeah, I'm back in business. So that's how I got back reconnected with the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, and I've been their agent ever since then.
Was that in Montana?
Yeah, that was in Missoula, Montana.
And then you end up somehow in Hollywood, California.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, okay, originally I wasn't going to go there. I was doing a lot of middling with, booking a lot of acts in the Northwest, and there was a company called Capricorn Records in Macon, Georgia, which at the time had all the cool Southern rock acts. They had the Allman Brothers and Charlie Daniels Band and Leonard Skinner, which we booked Leonard Skinner before it was Leonard Skinner. If you remember, it's Crawdad. Remember that? Skinner's name was Crawdad. And we were booking them like in the ranches, Kenny Wendell's places down in Galena, Kansas, and Joplin, Pittsburgh. We were booking them in clubs, and they were just asshole bad boys. We didn't get deposits on their shows because those bands weren't big enough back in the day. We didn't get deposits, so we were relying on the bands to send us commission, and they were bad about paying us. But that was before they signed their record contract with Capricorn Records. And when they signed, they changed their name to Leonard Skinner. That was before the plane crash, and then we lost them. That was another one. I don't know if you remember them, or
I remember Crawdad, I don't remember Steve Gaines.
Steve Gaines, right?
Steve Gaines.
Yes.
He died in that wreck.
Yes, he did. Yeah, yeah. So that was Leonard Skinner back in the day.
Playing a lot of OSU too.
Mm-hmm.
Big heavy set guy from Joplin area, singing that.
Well, it was Kenny's bouncer. What was his name?
Not singing.
No, I can't remember his name. He was the bouncer. Because we used to play down there in
One of the ranch?
the ranch in Galena and Pittsburgh. They had two clubs.
Big redhead guy.
Big guy, yeah. Well, I just remember he scared the shit out of me. I remember one night a fight broke out. We were playing down there. Fight broke out, and he took both guys that were fighting and slammed their heads together and knocked them both unconscious and drug them out of the club under his arms. Skip Hoppy, that's it. Skip Hoppy.
All right, the record's complete. Okay, good.
That was
One of the first times we played at the ranch, I physically saw right in front of the stage, somebody broke a beer bottle on another guy's head, right there, just like that. And they just kind of went on.
Oh, it's a rough and rowdy club. It was wild. And then we go back on the yeah, Kenny got shot. Some guy showed his house about 2 a.m. in the morning and shot him right in the face, killed him. He was a little drug activity, I think, going on or something. I don't know. Just rumors.
Somewhere I've lost complete control of this whole proceedings.
Well, Kenny,
Go ahead.
Kenny was putting, yeah, this was while I was still in Springfield, and Kenny Wendell, who owned those clubs, decided he wanted to get in the concert business and was putting up money for us to do some shows. And there's some pictures, and one of the biggest show we did was out at the fairgrounds, and it was with Edgar Winter, Rick Derringer, Poco, Granny's Bathwater was the show. And that was a big event for Springfield back in the day. We spent.
Did you bring Johnny Winter here?
Yes. Edgar.
Well, both of them.
Johnny later on a different show. And so Kenny was putting up the money and we were doing shows. We did, I'm trying to remember who the shows were. At the mosque, we did.
Was that before Blue Oyster Cult?
That was the last one I did before I moved to Montana.
I give you this list to refresh your recollection, but there's like 800 people on here that you've booked over the years. So, and really, if anybody wants to see it, it's incredible the people that he's booked over the years. So you were talking about Capricorn in in Georgia,
down in Macon, Georgia. So anyway, their agency, they just started. Capricorn started their own booking agency right there in Macon, Georgia, and they needed an agent. They wanted an agent to book the colleges with their roster. I love the roster of acts that they had. All those southern rock bands.
Elvin Bishop,
yeah. Grinder Switch.
Yeah.
Stillwater. So anyway, I flew down there to Macon, Georgia, and with the owner, we went out to dinner, and he offered me the job on the spot, and I foolishly said sure. I hadn't talked to my wife yet. So Kathy, I got back to the hotel.
I told you I wouldn't mention your name, but here's where Kathy said no. Yeah.
So I got back to the hotel room, and I called her, and I says, hey, we got this job. We're going to move to Macon, Georgia. And she says, I don't think so. She wanted nothing to do with Macon, Georgia. So I was distraught at the time, and I didn't. She's the boss, so. And I was on the phone in the hotel room with a show I'd done with, I think it was Doug Kershaw at the time, or it was Amazing Rhythm Aces maybe. I had a string of dates, and it was through Variety Arts in Los Angeles, and Bob Engel had called me up, one of the partners there, and he said, he called me back at the hotel, and he says, well, what are you doing, and where are you? And I said, Making Sure, what are you doing there? And I said, well, I was going to go to work for Alex Hodges offered me a job to come to Macon to work with them, and he said, well, listen, why don't you come to LA and let's talk? I'll pay the tickets. So I flew from Macon, Georgia to Los Angeles, and they offered me a job there at Variety Artist, and Kathy reluctantly went along with that one. But I thought, okay, this is more in the mainstream of rock and roll anyway. I want to be in LA, and so I took a job with a Variety Artist, and we moved. They paid for our move there, and that was short-lived.
1978.
1 year.
Yeah, and then to Minneapolis. So
well, via Denver. So what happened was.
Make a long story short, we ended up in Minneapolis.
Okay, but long story short is how we left there was the guys that had the Good Music Agency in Missoula, Montana, called up and said, we're moving. We're going to relocate the company from Montana to Denver, Colorado, and we want you to come, and we'll give you part ownership of the company to come. It's like, okay, I like that deal better. And the pay was, the money was going to be better. So we moved, and they paid for the move. We moved to Denver, and I was supposed to scout out office space, and they were going to relocate the company there. And we were there,
6 months.
well, but we were not even, we weren't even there a month, and we hadn't, it's just, started looking for office space. And I got a phone call from Doug and Brian, the owners, and they said, we've changed our mind. We're not coming to Denver. We're instead going to Minneapolis instead. We're going to relocate to Minneapolis. We think it's a better market for us to be in, the upper Midwest for all the club business they did and the bands they had. But we still want you to come. And they sweetened the pie and offered to pay the move, so we reluctantly moved to Minneapolis. The only thing I knew about Minneapolis was it was colder in Hades in the winters. But that's how we ended up in Minneapolis.
And stayed there for
35 years, yeah.
and that was with the same people from Missoula, Montana.
Same people in Missoula, just for a short time. We were building, I was responsible for building the national department, if you will, which was the larger national like touring. And, you know, we had, and that's when I signed the musical group, the Jets. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Jets. They had top five singles in the Billboard pop chart. Big band, they were all kids. It was all one family, and Mom had, how many kids total did she have? Was it?
19?
No, 14, I think. Yeah, they were from the island of Tonga, and they're Mormons, and big family. But the whole band, they were all brothers and sisters in the band. So crazy story. They a good friend of mine, Don Powell, who lived in Minneapolis. He came from Minneapolis. He moved to Chicago or Detroit rather, and worked at Motown Records, and he was Stevie Wonder's first manager when Motown managed the band in-house. And so he went from there. He moved to London, and he and Barry Marshall, who is still to this day one of the biggest concert promoters in the world, has martial arts, but they started a management company. He was managing David Bowie and Iggy Pop about the time that glam scene was starting to take off. And he was there for quite a while, and then he had a nervous breakdown and moved back to Minneapolis. His parents lived there, and they owned a whole chain of Ford dealerships all over the Dakotas and Wisconsin, Minnesota. And I started seeing him doing these ads on television for these conversion vans they were selling. And it's like, oh my God, how's this happen? But he called me up one night, and it was, I think, in January in Minnesota, and it was snowing out and cold as hell. I'm in front of the fireplace, and he says, what are you doing tonight? And I said, why? And he said, I want you to meet me up at the Sheraton Northwest. And it was a bar, you know, a hotel, the Sheraton Inn, and they had a lounge there. And I said, well, I'd jump through fire. If Don said jump through fire, this guy was just a genius, creative genius. So I met him up at the Sheraton Northwest, and we're sitting in the lounge, and there's nobody else there, and the snowstorm's going on. And it's all these kids doing cover tunes, and Mom and Dad are in the band too. And in the middle of the set, they go into this Polynesian fire dance, and I look at Don and say, what in the hell are you thinking about here? He said, trust me on this, and I did. I trusted him. He got Mom and Dad out of the, by the way, their van broke down. They were going back to Utah, and he put him into, got a house for him and put him into a house, and was just taking care of him, signed him to a contract, and was just literally buying groceries for him or whatever, and hired a choreographer, got Mom and Dad out of the band, went to some publishers and got a bunch of songs, put them in the recording studio, recorded the album. And then he came to me and said, okay, you got to get me a sit-down gig, Vegas or Reno, Tahoe. Just get me a casino, a sit-down gig in a lounge somewhere, and I'm going to fly these record execs up to see the band. So I got him at the Golden Nugget. I got him a week sit-down at the Golden Nugget in Vegas, in Reno, and started flying record execs in. And MCA Records, at the time, Erwin Azoff was the president of the label. He and Gerald Busby, who was the head of the black department there, Gerald got all excited, we got to sign this band, and he wanted to break them in black radio first, and then transfer them over, carry them over then to pop music. So anyway, he had I flew down there, met with Don, and got to go meet Erwin Azoff, and they signed with MCA Records, and the rest was history. They went on and had top five hit singles. I've got one of their platinum albums over there on the table. They had a huge career, so that's that story.
Okay, and so are you still at Good Music? Have you not started entertainment services?
Right. Yep, I'm still with Good Music Agency.
But eventually you start your own company, Entertainment Services International.
Right. So
which is still your company.
Yeah.
And what
Today.
you're doing now, yeah.
Right.
So how did that happen?
So I left there at, what year did I start Entertainment Services?
88.
88. Yeah, so we were still in Minneapolis, but I left GMA and took all the national acts with me, and the Daredevils, New Rise of the Purple Sage, and Martin Mike Martin Murphy and Elvin Bishop, and had some decent roster, and just started my own agency there, which was a little terrifying at first, but
But it's lasted.
it lasted, yeah.
And tell us about starting something called Backstage Planet.
So I was doing a lot of buying for casinos at the time. Had all the grand casinos at the time, and they had 8 properties. They had 2 in Minnesota. They were in all over, like Biloxi, Gulfport, Tunica, Mississippi, Kinder, Louisiana. And a friend of mine came to me because he was over his head. He was in the entertainment division, Lakes Gaming, and had made contracts with all these casinos that were either on Native American land or on the rivers, which was legal. And so he hired Marsh Edelstein, a good friend of mine there in Minneapolis, to buy all the bands. Well, Marsh had never booked national acts, but he was the guy for all the local bands in Minneapolis. And of course, they didn't know that he didn't know what he was doing, so he came to me and I says, I need you. We're going to make this deal and you're going to buy all the acts for all of these casinos. So that's kind of how that started. And then I don't even know how I did all that and then ran the agency at the same time, because I think at the time we had, 3 agents and myself and 2 admin assistants. Kathy was working in the office with me then. So anyway, was doing all the buying. Then every one of those casinos were doing, most of them were doing 2 shows a month, and their budget would be anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 for a show. So it was like ringing the cash register, but I was killing myself trying to keep up with that and the agents at the same time. And then Carolyn Huff, who was the entertainment director at one of the properties in Minnesota, the 2 properties in Minnesota, she was the entertainment director. She and her husband left, and we started with them and 2 other people. We started a company called Backstage Planet, and we were just signing up other casinos to do all their talent buying, and that's how that got started.
And then moved to Denver.
Yeah, about what was that? What year?
2014?
2014. We moved to Denver because my parents and I have 2 sisters that live there, and just wanted to get out of Minneapolis and wanted to be close to my parents. Thought, okay, well, let's just move to Denver, and we were there in Denver, still doing the same thing I was doing, ESI, Entertainment Service International, and both my parents later passed. I think we were in Denver, 8 years? 6.5 years, and then we decided after they left, and the cost of housing and everything in Denver was so damned expensive. We're thinking, we want to retire here, and it's like, no, not really. So we decided, let's go back to Springfield. I've got family here, Kathy's family, even though she's from St. Louis, they're all down in Southwest Missouri. So we moved to Springfield about 3 years ago.
To retire, except you're still working like
Still
me.
working,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
We've been too mad at money over the years to
Yeah.
retire yet.
Yeah. And so, what a crazy life. And like I said, hard work, smart, luck, including Kathy saying no to going to making
Her
Georgia.
keeping me straight.
Yeah.
God only knows what would have happened if it weren't for her.
And so, written, reviewed, negotiated over 10,000 contracts. I mean, you've done work all over the world. Done work for, you say, notable clients, venues, and events, and I won't read them all, but, from like Bass Pro Shops that we know of, NASA, Microsoft, IBM, Land O'Lakes, ConocoPhillips, Major League Baseball, Harley Davidson, Beechcraft. I'm just kind of throwing darts here. What did that involve?
So with most of those corporations, they would, I'd have a connection, they would get connected with me, I'd know somebody they'd know or whatever, and all these big corporations, they do typically at least one big event a year, where they'll bring in clients, or they'll do it for all their employees or whatever, maybe a year-end party or something, and they all want to have a big name entertainer, and they've got budgets that are, back in the day, I don't know, things about 1988, things slimmed down a little bit, that recession. But anyway, they have big budgets, and they'd call up and just say, we need you to hire an entertainer, and we want you to come in and just produce the concert portion of our event. And so, I'd get a list of available artists and their prices, and then the CEO would look at it, and he'd have to talk to his wife, and she'd say, this is the band, my favorite band, and that's the band that got hired. And so then I would, we get paid, to go produce the show, and they pay me 10% on top of the cost of the talent for doing it.
And kind of making sure we get the record here. Television and radio, The Simpsons, Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor, Hollywood Squares, Don Kirshner's rock concert, right?
Yeah, I've had artists doing all of those. The Simpsons, the funniest one. They called me up. I was representing Randy Bachman at the time from the Guess Who, and then later Bachman Turner Overdrive, BTO. But they wanted to do a show with Randy Bachman, and the theme of the show was Homer was going to the state fair to see BTO perform the concert there, and so they did a likeness of Randy Bachman, and I negotiated the contract, the deal for that, and they did a show with him, and Homer Simpson goes to the state fair to see BTO and gets to meet him.
You mentioned the Guess Who, who's had some interesting things happen, but among those, so a Canadian band, and there's a Canadian a postage stamp, right?
Oh, yeah. So Canada Post, which is like the U.S. postal system, there's called Canada Post, and somebody that worked there called up and said, we need to do a postage stamp of the Guess Who. So I worked on it with them, and we ended up getting a stamp, and so the band has their own stamp with their logo on it. They gave me a plaque once it was all done, and that's over on the table.
And again, just to make sure we get the record. So you've been involved with amusement parks, Hershey Park, Six Flags, Magic Mountain, SeaWorld, Orlando, Universal Studios, Disneyland, Walt Disney World Resorts, Epcot, Silver Dollar City. So what's your involvement with those?
The book, The Ozark Mountain Daredevils, there.
Okay.
Do you guys remember that?
Yeah. Historic venues, the Apollo Theater in the Harlem, Biltmore Estate, Grand Ole Opry, Ryman Auditorium, Graceland, Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, that's in New York, if I'm not mistaken.
It's on the grounds of where Woodstock was.
Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And so just briefly tell us about those venues.
So the Apollo Theater was, and when the Jets first broke on black radio, the Apollo Theater wanted them. So we got them booked there. That was a big coup, because if you're black act and you play the Apollo Theater, you've arrived. That's the venue wherever black act wants to play. It's historic.
Sporting events, gosh, it's like a who's who. Kentucky Derby, Major League Baseball World Series, Super Bowl 26, boxing matches, 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, the Balloon Fest in Albuquerque, Daytona Bike Week, Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, among others.
So yeah, Sturgis was that last booking at Sturgis, because I'd had a few acts that had played Sturgis, but during COVID, I got a phone call, and Brad Coombs called up and says, we got to do, okay. So he said, we're going to run. South Dakota didn't shut down during COVID. So what happened was he called up and he was having trouble getting acts. And he said, well, the Guess Who play there? And I called the guys and said, what do you think? And Chris. So the band said, yep, sure, we want to work. They weren't afraid of it. And those guys, they thought it was a lot of hooey. And it's like, okay, I'll book it then. And they said, but one condition, you've got to go. And so I agreed, and we booked it, and went and did the show, and it made the national news. They were saying it was going to be a super spreader event, and we got death threats on our social media. You're killing people. It was pretty crazy. It's just all about the money. You don't care about people's health, and it was pretty bizarre. But anyway, we played the event. We're out there, and there was, on Sturgis, there's it's the Buffalo Chip, the main stage there. We're playing there, and there was probably about 12,000 bikers there. I mean, it was just packed, and no mask, nothing. And as it turned out, it wasn't as bad a deal as it turned out, as they said it was going to be.
Okay, real quick, to wrap up, just a few more things. Who you been involved with other than what we already talked about? A lot. There's a list of all the people he's booked over the years, and it's incredible. President Bill Clinton, speaking engagement, the White House, Ronald Reagan administration, Smithsonian Institution, the John Daly Annual Charity Golf Tournament and Concert Jam, and the Rolling Stones Tattoo You 1981 closed circuit concert event, and you mentioned to me, and I haven't heard the story, and if you have time to briefly tell it, you had lunch or brunch with the Rolling Stones?
True story.
Okay.
So, when I lived in Denver, the first time I got to be real good friends with Chuck Morris, who was the vice president of Fayline Presents, and Barry Fay was I don't know, you people wouldn't know who he is, but he was a famous concert promoter. And so anyway, I got to be real good friends with him, and we were moving to Minneapolis, and Chuck, and they had the Rolling Stones coming in to do 2 shows in Boulder at Folsom Field at the football stadium with Hart and George Thorogood opening the shows. And he said, Chuck said, well, why don't you fly back down, just hang with me for the shows? And I said, sure. So flew down and we were hanging backstage, and then the first day, and this helicopter drops down backstage there, and out comes Bill Graham, who is the biggest concert promoter in the world. I mean, he was the tour manager. He had the entire Rolling Stones tour. So Bill Graham gets out, Keith Richards, Mick Jagger, and so anyway, we were standing around talking, and they go over to this tent backstage there for lunch before the show. Chuck says, come on back, and it's like, okay. So I sit down at the table, and I'm right across from Keith Richards. Mick Jagger's the next one over. Bill Graham was the next one over, and Barry Fay was across from him, and Chuck next to me, and I had lunch with those guys, and Barry Fay, the owner of the company, looks over at Chuck and says, what the hell is he doing here? I just kept my mouth shut.
None of them remembered me or any of us here. Okay. For the record.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, questions from the audience, if you have any. Here's Barney.
So you saw a long debate. Was the pie chocolate or banana cream?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Was it chocolate or coconut cream?
He's referring to when we were at the Plaza Towers and was sitting on the phone in my desk, and Barney and I had office together. Both of us were in the same room, and Lloyd Hicks pops into the room, and I'm on the phone, and Lloyd comes up to my desk, and he's got his hand like, takes a cream pie and smacks me right in the face with it, and then ran out of the office.
I think it was chocolate.
It might have been, I don't know. I was so furious at the time, I couldn't believe it. I think he wasn't happy because we were booking too many shows for Shadow Rock and a couple of our other favorite bands, and I think, was he in, what band was he in at the time? Fools?
The Grannies or Skeletons, I can't.
The Skeletons, maybe? Yeah, it was before. That 76, 5 or 6, maybe? Anyway, he was not too happy. We weren't giving him enough bookings. And I got it, not Barney, I got it.
I was grateful that you got the pie and I did.
Questions, Butch?
I have a few people shout out names of people that are way back that we might not have thought of for a while, because I've seen that list of his bookings. There's 700 or 900 different people or acts. Entertainers, and
I've got a couple of copies I'll put over the table if you're curious of looking through it.
Shout out a group, and I bet he's booked them.
The reason I was able to put that together, because my memory's not that good, but all through my career and through the different agencies, we always had to have paperwork for every booking. And so I'd have a code for every artist that would go onto the contract along with the date. So I've kept files with all of those codes of the different agencies I've been at, and I was able to go back through them, and I alphabetized one master list, and there's over 700 names. And it's frightening. It's like, I don't know where the years went.
Well, we could do this all night here.
Yes.
Colleen, one more question.
Yes, have you written a book?
No. My wife keeps threatening to do it. Oh, we haven't even touched on the stories. Oh my God. That's a whole nother session where I could tell you stories of big people, names, and you wouldn't believe the stories. It's just the craziest stuff.
It's rock and roll.
It really is.
The stories that he could share about getting entertainers on stage or out of the dressing room, or what he's contended with. We need to do a second show just on...
Yeah, just on stories. On big name acts you would know, but the stories you wouldn't believe, and they're all true. It's just...
You can do a book now.
Yeah, there you go.
We can do part 2 on this, or 3.
If there's interest, I'd love to do it because it's just fun telling. The stories are the fun part. This was like
We got another.
biographical, but
We got another one down there. Bill Jones is going to do a part 2 probably sometime.
Bill, you had enough for 4 sessions, I think.
Nick Sibley.
I just had a question. You know, and like there's different businesses. Like most lawyers have been to lawyer school, but
Most.
most entrepreneurs haven't really been to food service school. You know, it's just so weird. There's a disconnect between the education and what you do. It's like it's such a complicated thing. And I meet young people all the time. They say, I'm majoring in entertainment at MSU. Could they teach what you do?
Well, I will say this. There are some schools, like UCLA, there are some schools that have started doing music programs and degrees or classes that you can take, and, you know, they'll be on various aspects of the business, whether it's record producing or whether it's,
Belmont's big on it.
yeah, so that, back in the day, it wasn't at all, and I laugh, I tell you that, you know, for the job that I've had and the work I've done, I could have had 4 different degrees. Psychology, because you're dealing with the artist. A law degree, because I've done over 10,000 contracts over my career. Accounting, small business, marketing. You could use a degree in every one of those. I never had an education in much at all. Like I said, I dropped out in my second year of college, and I was ADD. And I didn't know I was ADD. I never read a book until I was 40 years old. And I didn't know I was ADD because back in the day, nobody knew what that was. But just fortunate. I've been blessed. Chris?
Did your brother-in-law finally did he get a chance to make his walnut trees grow?
You lost me on that one.
When he had the Peppermint Lounge,
Peppermint Lounge, yeah.
and they bought some acreage.
Oh, Steve, yeah, and I don't know the story. You'll have to ask Terry about that. I don't know the story about that. Yeah, he owned the Peppermint Lounge, which was before Wine and Spirits. The reason he got the Peppermint Lounge is because back then it was real hard to get a liquor license in Springfield, and they had a lottery system. So what Steve did was he bought Peppermint Lounge, which he got their license by virtue of that, and then moved over to Wine and Spirits, you know, relocated.
Executive Lounge.
At the time, yeah, exactly.
And American Artist was across the street.
Right. So that's a story. But I've been blessed. I didn't have the education to do any of this. I didn't have a career path ever.
Can I interject something here? I worked for him for 17 years, and I'll tell you the number one reason he's been as successful as he is his integrity and his honesty. He's never done a bad deal for anybody. And he always knows how to, if there's an issue or a problem, how to solve it. When I worked for him, I was like, wow, it's uncanny, his ability when there's a bad deal, people not doing the right thing, that he would be able to get them to see that, you know, what they were doing and correct it. And I'm really proud.
Thank you, babe. Well, it's just been a blessing. Things just evolved organically, and one thing would lead to another, and it just, like I said, it was never planned. It was just, I've been blessed. I've been real lucky, and if any of you ever have any needs or something, I'm always happy to give back, or an artist, I'll throw in some time and advice just to try and help to give back, because I have been so blessed. And
Is this what you're going to remember yourself as, what your wife spoke of you just then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what others will remember you for too, right?
hope so.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
remember the Lyons brothers and I Cantina? Yeah, don't do that, right? Yeah. I mean, it's a lesson, right? That was the early lesson. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
What do you think?